Hello, and welcome to the Temple of the False Pod, where decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And today, you ready? We've got a
Yeah.
deck tale. Woo! For those who don't know, our deck tales are just deck decks that we like to tell little stories about. Get it? Deck tale. And DuckTales is a popular animated children's show from the 90s? Featuring Scrooge McDuck and Donald's nephews. What's the relationship between Donald and Scrooge? Do you know?
I don't.
Okay. Well,
they're from the same duck family.
Maybe. Is it like? I think Scrooge McDuck is Donald's uncle, but not Huey, Dewey, and Louie's father. So just like a different uncle, different parents, sibling. I don't know. I think it doesn't matter.
Really? Who gives a duck?
There you go. I completely lost track of what we were talking about, but it's a deck tale, and Bruce brought a deck. You want to tell us about Glissa, the Trader?
Let me tell you about Glissa, the Trader. So it costs black, green. It's a 3/3 with first strike and death touch.
Whoa, a 3/3 for 3?
Yes.
That's some pretty good value.
And it's first strike and death touch.
Wow.
And wow, it's rare to find two creature abilities that work so well together. So whenever a creature an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. That's what Glissa does. You can take a wild guess without even going and clicking the link as to what my deck does. You will not be surprised to find out there are a lot of artifacts and a lot of ways to kill my opponent's creatures, or make them sacrifice those creatures, or somehow make them put the creatures into the graveyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As always, we've got deck lists provided in the description. Yeah. Where do we even begin with this? I love, as you said, first strike and death touch as a thing. Like, it's just a great thing. Especially as a 3/3. I think that really makes it even more powerful because you can block with 3 creatures and Glissa still kills them all.
It's funny with this, I've had other decks where, I use Glissa aggressively, and this one is not one of those. It very much sits back and plays defense. I'm not willing to risk swinging Glissa in to have somebody, give some kind of surprise and cause issues, or just let it through and take a tiny little 3 points of commander damage, which in the greater scheme of things is irrelevant. And look, now it's tapped, and the first strike death touch doesn't mean anything. Having it sitting there as a blocker means no one is swinging anything that doesn't fly or have some other kind of evasion.
That's
this
fair.
Thing just takes creatures out, and people just aren't willing to throw their stuff away. Especially when I have an ability that says, by the way, when you swing at me and your creature dies, I then can take an artifact out of the graveyard and put it in my hand. So, if you're always only ever taking stuff out of your graveyard and putting it in your hand, it's never that oppressive, dominating feel that you can get from other decks that take it from the graveyard and put it directly into play. You're always going to have to recast it. So it's not as though I'm going to get to sneak some, massive artifact into the graveyard and then get to put it onto the battlefield for free.
You're not getting You're not getting a cityscape leveler every turn,
Right. It's not happening because it's going to go to your hand and then you have to pay for it. So realistically, the deck in the early game plays pretty much like everybody else. You want to get some stuff in your graveyard, but primarily you're ramping like crazy. You need to ramp for this deck because if you want to play out those cards, you have to be able to cast them. This deck doesn't run a whole lot of shortcut ways to get stuff onto the battlefield. You just get the mana and cast it. So, so for your worm coils and your steel hellkites and all that sort of thing, you just need the mana. So, I will say the ramp package is tailored with Glissa's ability in mind. I mean, your Wayfarer's Bauble is cute, but it's far more effective when you can get it back in your hand and play it back out again and do it again. And the same go. I mean, I've got Wanderer's Twig in here, and
A what now?
probably exactly. Wanderer's Twig is a 1 mana artifact, and for 1 you can sack it, search your library for a basic, reveal it, and you put it in your hand.
Okay.
So it's not ramp, but it guarantees you're dropping a mana every turn.
It's it's the less exciting half of rampant growth.
Right. So for a lot of folks, they're going to look at this and be like, "No, I don't think so." And I completely understand that, but it's in here because it's the cheap cost. Like Deathrite Shaman is another one. It looks at the stuff that's in the graveyard, because I'm constantly putting stuff in the graveyard and using that as a way to ramp, and so that's sort of a benefit there. And the other one, like Lotus Petal, is in here. It's in here because I have it.
Yeah.
But and why not? It's free, so you can always put it in your hand, and basically you're putting it right back onto the battlefield. And Revel in Riches, I also have another ramp. I'm never sure whether this should be in ramp because it costs 5 to begin with, but I mean, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you get a treasure. Well, that's what this deck does.
Yeah.
It's trying to kill opponent's creatures. This is, so why not get the benefit for doing what you're already trying to do? So.
Yeah, Revel in Riches for me is always that balance of like, am I using this for ramp or am I using this for tertiary value? And like, it's never about the win condition for me.
No.
Because like, nobody wants to do that. I mean, plenty of people do, and good for you, I guess. But it just feels so one note. Having done it once, I'm like, I did it. Okay, and achievement unlocked.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I've done it once with this deck.
Yeah.
And after that, it was, every time you play it, it's like, I have no intention of trying to use the win con. Just know that I will be, burning these treasures up as fast as I can get them.
Right. And it's interesting. So you built this deck. Like, when was the last time you updated this deck, I guess, is more of the question.
I suspect Dominaria, because the Eldest Reborn is part of my removal package.
Okay.
So I think that's probably the most recent update.
Yeah, and Generous Patron from Battle Bond.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like anything else is probably... Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this deck could be a lot better if I had gone through and made the updates.
Right. And I mean, like, I think it would drastically change if you made the updates. I think that there's, like, plenty of things now that would play with the treasure stuff, or at least, like, artifacts leaving the battlefield. Like, that's a whole other way that you could go with this, is the egg type archetype of, like, small things to crack for value to then bring back and crack for value again.
Right. And I mean, when you look at the list, there is plenty of chaff in the list. It's not like there aren't cards in here that could easily come out. I already mentioned Wanderer's Twig. I mean, a quick glance, Viridian Longbow does not need to be in this deck. I mean, it's cute. Tap a creature to do a point of damage to another creature. Okay, but that's just not good enough.
I mean, I think that, like, as a fanatic of Viridian Longbow, it is nice to have it in here with a Vraska. Vraska's combat damage. Anyway.
Well, it's nice to have it in there with Vadi Ildal.
Yeah.
I mean, who can turn a target creature's power or toughness to 1.
Right.
I mean,
but I mean, even beyond that, you could attach it to Glissa, and then as it comes to your turn, kill something. And I think that, like, those are great tools to have in this, because it does end up becoming more of turning your graveyard into your hand.
Right.
Like, almost literally at this point. Because if you can, for free, activate Glissa, kill something, for free, get something back from your graveyard into your hand. It's essentially part of your hand.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think even that, like, is pretty good. You know, you've got things like Quietus Spike, which may be more of the type of thing where it's like, well, that could come out if I wanted to, you know. But I do love this deck for its lack of, like, specific package, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
like, I feel like with cards like Glissa, there's, generally speaking, like 4 or 5 cards that you want to go search for to get into your graveyard, to get into your hand. Like, the whole, essentially tutoring for win condition and then winning.
Right.
But with this, it does seem much more toolboxy, where it's like, I'm going to use Glissa throughout the game to generate tools so that I can deal with my opponent's threats and then somehow figure out the win as we go.
Yeah.
Which I know is, generally speaking, how you like to build decks anyway.
Right.
Because you like having that, like, structured through line, but also
Right. And
figuring out how to, like, adapt.
Right. And at the same time, I don't want the same route every time.
Yeah.
This is like so every single Glissa the Trader deck should have Executioner's Capsule in it.
Right.
Like, for those who don't know, Executioner's Capsule is a black artifact. It costs 1 black mana. For 1 and a black, you tap it and sack it to destroy target non-black creature. With Glissa out, what this means is when you sack it, it's in the graveyard. Then you destroy an opponent's creature, which lets you bring an artifact back to your hand. Executioner's Capsule. Pay the black, it comes back into play. You can then immediately pay 1 and a black to tap, sack it again, and destroy another non-black creature. Again, it's already in the graveyard. It comes back to your hand. You can play it out again. So the loop is only limited by the number of non-black creatures and the amount of mana you have. But it's one of these key cards, and it's part of the reason I do not have tutors in this deck. Because to me, that's one of the cards I would go for every single time. Because it lets Glissa do what Glissa wants to do. And, you know, and it's just sitting out there, and everybody knows. It's like, okay, well, I'm just waiting. Give me a reason to use it.
And it's interesting too, because, like, with that kind of cycle, I hesitate to call it like a combo, because, like, it's a combo in the strictest sense of the word, where, like, it creates an engine. I guess that's the word. It's an engine, where you like, it does bring itself back until the board is clear, but you need that, what is it, 2 mana to, like, or 3 mana to, like,
you need
activate
3 mana to loop it.
And it doesn't hit everything, which is the other thing.
Yeah.
But I've definitely been
misses a lot.
Yeah. I've definitely been in games where I am not playing black. And I know, hard to imagine. Where I'm not playing black, and I do get stuck in that, like, okay, now I just need to figure out how to deal with Glissa, because, like, that's the problem, you know, is, like,
right.
And I, like, it's not by any means overbearing. It's a strong combo, but it's not like, oops, you know. Which I love. I love that about your decks anyway.
Yeah.
And
on top of that, it is 3 mana to do to cast it and use it. So if you want to cast it, use it, and then cast it out again, that's 4. And realistically, you don't want to run out of mana.
Right.
So if you're looking at 3 mana to loop it, well, okay, how many creatures? If I've got 9 mana, I can get rid of 3 creatures. Well, if I have 9 mana, there's probably a pile of creatures on the board, and taking out 3 of them is only just a start.
Right.
And you have to cast it, so it has to be on your turn. and now you've used up all of this mana on your turn. So when you pass to your opponent, what's going to happen? I mean, you know, there is, you know, it has limited use, and I think this is sort of a running theme with this deck. It just feels like there's a lot of times where it can do great things, but there always seems to be some kind of a restrictor. There's a limiter on what it can do and how far it can go, and you know, maybe it can sort of lock the board a little, but not quite. And so there's always the opportunity for the opponents to be doing stuff and taking you out. The deck is strong, but it's definitely not impossible to beat.
Yeah. It's a fascinating deck where I think it always surprises me how quickly it can take off. Granted, you know, 3 mana commander makes sense.
Right.
And honestly, like, green, black isn't that hard to come up with on turn 3.
I can't recall. I don't recall the last game where I couldn't play this on turn 3.
Right.
My mana base has a lot of duels because I want to see this thing come out on turn 3 all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a ton of them. I mean, I think there's only 4 basic forests in the deck.
Right.
So
and 14 swamps.
Yeah. Right, and 14 swamps. So I should be able to find 2 green and a black.
Yeah.
In the first 3 mana. So
especially with the ramp that you have, and especially with the card draw that you have, and it's always fun too because, like, beyond that, like, even if it does take you further than turn 3 to get Glissa out, because you can't get Glissa out with the Soul Ring, so there goes that ramp.
Yeah.
And, you know, signets aren't going to help you with Glissa. Or at least, like, ramping into Glissa, because you're going to be playing a signet on turn 2, unless you get the turn 1 Soul Ring. Right. And then so turn 3, you're playing your 3rd land. Yeah. You would have played, it's just going to help you get that extra value. And
oh yeah, most of the ramp is there to help you with everything else that you're looking to cast.
Yeah.
So,
and like I said, like, I love that this has, like, there's not a single thing that you're trying to get back from the graveyard with Glissa. You're looking for ways to deal with your opponent's threats. You're looking for ways to improve your board state, especially with, like, Vidalcan Orrery. Like, with Vidalcan Orrery, Glissa, and the bow, what is it, the Viridian Longbow, like,
yeah,
you, like, that really sells how much your graveyard is part of your hand, because at any moment you can get your answer out of your graveyard, put it onto the battlefield. I do love, though, the higher end threats here. You've got the Vulture Zombie, the Steel Hellkite, the Worm Coil Engine, but also things like Windgrace's Judgment, which is just, like, excellent.
The nice part with Windgrace's Judgment is when you have Glissa out, a mass removal spell that takes out all of your opponent's creatures. Very useful. But you probably don't have enough artifacts in your graveyard to put back in your hand to take full advantage of that. Whereas Windgrace's Judgment, it's a 4-player game. You've got 3 opponents. You don't have 3 artifacts in your graveyard. I bet you do by the time you're playing Windgrace's Judgment. Yeah. And it's instant speed, so you can snatch them up at the end of your opponent's turn and then play them out on your turn. So it works out. You know, it's a really nice removal spell.
Yeah, I like. It's gonna sound bad. Here's my Christmas carol of the day. My magical Christmas land story that I'm hoping for you. Play Glissa. Your opponents have so many creatures, right? You've got Lotus Petal in the graveyard. You play a mass removal spell. All those go on the stack. Every stack. And, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention, you have the Vidalcan Orrery out. Everything on the stack, you get the Lotus Petal back, play it, instant speed, crack it, and then resolve through, and you just continue. And now you've got a bunch of mana that you can play into nothing.
Well, you get the Shimmer Mirror out.
Oh, there you go.
And then everything gets flash, and then you can just play whatever.
Oh, there you go. You don't even need the Vidalcanori. You've got the $2 Shimmer Mirror.
Yeah.
Which, wow, Vidalcanori's come down in price.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got all these things. I think that's the biggest thing that I think this deck is missing is like a mana sink. So like I keep mentioning this, right? Like this idea that you could very easily have a package of things that you want in your graveyard to then pull from, rather than this toolbox. You have set cards of like, okay, like I always want to go for artifact, cityscape leveler. Well, I guess even that would be great in this deck. I'm trying to think of like things that will win the game on the spot. Anyway, this deck is much more refined to the idea that each card that is an artifact, because like this deck wants to be focused around artifacts, which is good, but those artifacts in this deck don't want to do that one purpose of like they want to like be able to be pick and chosen. Like feel like I'm not making sense, but like
I'm looking at incremental value.
Yeah.
None of these cards. It's pretty rare that one of these cards is going to come out and just turn the entire tide of the game. Like it's just going to stop the game and shift it dramatically. It's just slow, steady, incremental gain. Now it's like, yeah, I did this. Okay, now it's in the graveyard. Now it's back in my hand. Now I've played it out again.
Yeah.
I'm pushing, get a little more value, keep the churn going. I always come across with this deck, it's like, yeah, Bruce is doing stuff, but it's not going to kill me yet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think one of the more common game-ending threats that I end up having is like Etched Champion with a Sword of Feast and Famine on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in the end, then I'm getting a 4/4, but more importantly, I'm getting to untap my mana.
Whenever I see a Meteor Golem in your decks, it's generally being cheated in, and not as but with Grenzo, it's obviously being flipped from the bottom.
Yep.
With Emil, it's just being flickered. But in this, you don't really seem to have a way to just put it on the battlefield.
No, you pay the 7, and then when it dies,
you have to
put it back in your hand eventually and pay 7 more to do it again. It's there because it was the artifact and because I can recur it, but man, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Mimic that, baby.
Well, yes, that's certainly that's one way to get around for most of the stuff. So,
love the inclusion of a Dead Bridge Chant. Always love a 6 mana enchantment that can really turn the game with just luck, I guess.
And I've I long ago just gave up on the idea that it was ever going to actually do something helpful beyond load my graveyard.
Yeah, 6 mana to mill 10 is excellent.
Yes, because I appreciate, like, for folks who don't know, it says at the beginning of your upkeep, choose a card at random from your graveyard. If it's a creature card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand. Maybe it works for other people, but Dead Bridge Chant for me consistently finds something other than a creature. So it goes in my hand. That's great. Maybe it's a land. Maybe it's whatever. So there's some benefit there, but primarily it's to get the cards in the graveyard in the first place. So I don't worry about the second benefit. I worry about getting the 10 cards in. Once they're in, somebody goes through and disenchants it or destroys it in some way. All right, it's already done what I wanted it to do. If it sticks around for an upkeep and adds a card to my hand, so be it. And for the most part, a lot of the cards that end up in my graveyard are my lands. because I have
Yeah.
a lot of sack lands in this one, primarily there for Deathrite Shaman. But if Deadbridge Chant wants to put a sack land back in my hand so I can play it out, sack it again for something for another land, I'll take that.
Yeah. I mean, that's all I got for questions for the current iteration of the deck. Is there
Okay.
anything else you want to highlight here?
I love Vulture Zombie,
Okay.
and I appreciate that it's probably a card that isn't specifically good in this deck, other than I'm trying to kill off my opponent's creatures, so it gets more counters that way. But the counters on this on Vulture Zombie, because it's opponent into any opponent's graveyard from anywhere, so discard counts and everything counts. I mean, you can use a spin down because you're practically spinning it that fast to count up the +1/+1 counters that go on this thing. I really like it. It's very basic. It's pretty straightforward, and it doesn't have any kind of protection, so it oftentimes just dies. But yeah, I love this. I love that card, and I think it's created more threatening board states than a lot of the other cards on the board or in the deck.
Yeah, what I find fascinating about Vulture Zombie is I think it would trigger a lot more than I would realize, considering like anything off of like Impulse Draw eventually goes to the graveyard.
Yeah.
Kind of, sometimes. And so
Right.
like you really have to kind of pay attention to that. But also with tokens being so ubiquitous, it's going to trigger a lot less than you would. I think it might feel bad more recently than it would have probably. When
Yeah, I don't think it's been getting better.
Right.
But I'll regularly go. It doesn't. Seeing 10 +1/+1 counters get added to a card in a round is not unheard of.
Right.
I mean, it just doesn't take that much. I mean, even Windgrace's Judgment alone is going to add 3 counters to it, and that's before anybody else does anything. So
yeah, and I think that's really nice too to have it being at 5 mana, because I think like it's going to attract the ire of your opponents and be the target of their removal, which is always nice to have when it's like, look over here so you don't kill Glissa,
Right. Yeah, sure, take out Glissa, and he just going to keep getting bigger. By the way, what card did you use to take out Glissa? Oh, right, it was a spell. I'll put another counter on the zombie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah. So, looking to the future, what's your immediate with this deck? Like, what do you
future?
Yeah.
Well, the immediate future is the library card catalog.
Oh.
This deck is coming apart. I've had it for a long time, and unfortunately, I'm at the point now where I feel like it plays the same way too often. It's too frequently it bogs down against opponents that are just black, or that have just black creatures, because it doesn't do enough. A lot of it is, so much of it is non-black.
Yeah.
I feel like it plays the same way. I mean, I think I probably could have given it a major overhaul, changed a lot of the cards in it, or made a conscious decision, be like, okay, Glissa and everything else is artifacts, and just forced it that way, and just to try something different. I think there were options, but at the time, it was the least fun of the decks that I had, and I had a new deck coming, and well, I'm trying to keep to 15 decks. So new deck comes, one deck's got to go. So right now, it's like I said, it's sitting in the card catalog, and at some point it'll come back. Probably not in this exact iteration. I suspect I will upgrade significantly, but yeah, it was it was time. It was time.
So, are you replacing it with another Golgari deck? Is your new deck
I replaced it with Mazarek.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll hear from Mazarek soon.
Oh yeah, very soon, very soon.
So, with it going away,
Yeah.
I think it's much easier to think about upgrades. It's easier to think about
Yeah.
things that you would do differently, say, next time. Because like normally I'd ask like, oh, what is your upgrade strategy? What are you taking out and putting in to make this do what you want it to do more? But obviously with it being taken apart, it's much easier to think about how would I build this differently, because it's essentially from the ground up. What would you like to see more from this deck, knowing the direction of green and black has gone over the past, say, 5 years since Dominaria?
The fundamentals of the deck, your ramp package, your card draw, I could definitely just go straight artifact. It just isn't that hard anymore. There are enough ways to make that work. When the deck comes back, I'm seriously considering a Voltron option. I didn't want to do that this time because I already have a couple of decks that already go down that route, and I don't want all of them going down that route. But I think Glissa the Trader, with a pile of swords, with the Swift Boots and the Lightning Greaves are already there. The Whisper Silk Cloak is already there. It really wouldn't be that much work to add in a few more pieces of equipment, which, when someone gets rid of them, will get played right back out again because it's Glissa. I think that it can loop around. I still think that would create a gameplay situation where, you swing in, do significant damage, or, get close to killing someone, where there's still plenty of opportunities for opponents to do things back to allow for a back and forth. I think the worst thing is, if you're running Voltron and then suddenly you realize you've got a Voltron that's a one kill. It's a one kill engine. I don't want that. So, that's, I think, sort of the way I'm looking at. But I mean, there's so many cards.
I think it's interesting because it's very easy to, from today's perspective, to go more of the, at least for me maybe, like you went the Voltron route. I think personally I would think of it of going more of the aristocrat route, but
Sure.
like the artifact based aristocrat route. We've got things like Nadir, Agent of the Dust Mill, which we've had a whole episode about, a deck that I have based around this, where itself gets bigger when a token you control leaves the battlefield. Granted, this is less token based currently, but
that can change dramatically, especially when you're looking at card draw and you're looking at artifacts. I mean, I don't think it's that difficult to start making a pile of clues. Something like when you start figuring out, what is it, assembly worker?
Yeah.
It just
no.
it's not assembly worker.
Academy manufacturer.
Thank you. It just things can spiral very quickly. One thing I wouldn't change is there would be a temptation to put in the more expensive artifacts, the ones that dominate a board. But that only really makes sense if I've got a way to cheat them into play.
Right.
And Glissa kind of nullifies that right off the bat. It wants you to put them in your hands. So I don't really want a pile of cards that are going to cost a fortune. Like we already said, Meteor Golem is tough if the only option I've got to cheat it into play is So if you're relying on Mimic that as your only option, well, that's not really where you want to go. So.
And it's interesting too, because with my Nadir idea, it makes Nadir bigger as tokens leave, but also when Nadir leaves, you make a wide board state to kind of protect yourself until you get anything back online, or just go with that. And then I was like, then I would rather maybe with Nadir being more of a focus, have Nadir be the commander, and then I'm like, then that just changes the deck entirely. But it's so interesting to think about this and try to not change Glissa. And I think you're on the right track with, like, if you're gonna rebuild this, to go that route of Voltron.
Yeah.
And I think with that, you would then need to add vigilance. Our favorite word.
Yeah.
Because this does heavily rely on
Oh,
doing the thing. It's either you gotta go vigilance or gotta go lure. And who likes playing lure?
Yeah, I mean, given the number of indestructible creatures that are floating around,
or shield counters.
First strike death, or shield counters. First strike death touch. Well, now suddenly you need trampler flying just to get through, and it makes things difficult. But
no, I think this deck's great.
I think there are all kinds of options, and I would be curious to see to see this deck as straight artifact, and how fast can I ramp? Start looking at a pile of treasures and in the hopes that I'd be able to cast 2 or 3 or 4 different things every turn. But who knows? We'll see. We'll see how it. We'll see what happens in the next year or so.
Cool. Anything else you want to add to this?
Not really. I think. Glissa had 7-year run. It was. It's been around a while, and saw a few edits, and probably could have seen a few more. If I were to, if I'm just changing a handful of cards, it's a lot of that non-black removal. I think is where I would go. I'd want to change that. Chupacabra was always supposed to get into this thing and never did. So.
Yeah.
But. Oh well.
Yeah, that's always tough too, because it's like. Then, do you want to recur the Chupacabra? It's all these things,
And how do you recur the Chupacabra? So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's great. I love this deck, as I said. I just love the design space that they played with here that I feel like we don't get nearly enough of lately, because I think we are just we get so many legendary creatures every set that I feel like a lot of them tend to end up being either too vague or too restrictive, and I think that this does a good job of being that middle point of how we like to build decks, where it does a thing generally rather than a thing specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that makes sense.
Cool.
All right.
I think that's going to do it for us this week. It's a wonderful deck tale. We'll be back next week, probably with another deck tale. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching if you're watching on YouTube, because we got the cards on the screen. We got these cool little boxes around our face. We got this cool background that's moving fog. It's rad. If you're not watching on YouTube, go click that subscribe button. And in fact, if you're watching on YouTube and you're not subscribed, do it. Do it! But thank you. We're Temple of Falsepod, where decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
That's Bruce. Thank you for watching. Play some Magic for me. Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the Temple.
Bye!
Wait. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is at Manaburned, and I'm at Andy Weekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, like, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!